I'm going to try to resist the temptation of reading through the comments while we're doing this.
Well, that's good because we just went live. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm talking to Ivan of the channel King Crocoduck about the origins of SJWs, which will undoubtedly find us in the realms of intersectionalism and postmodernism, and where exactly these things come from. It's probably going to get a bit heavy, but we'll live with it when we get through it. It's important to know. And what are your qualifications? You're a physicist, aren't you, Ivan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah,
you're a lecturer at university, yes?
I'm what?
Are you, are you a lecturer at a university? Obviously.
No, but I will be in a few months.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing supplemental teaching for undergraduates. I'll be starting grad school in a few months. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So where exactly would you like to start?
Well, I think a good place to start is the arguments between the rationalists and the empiricists. They emerged in the 1700s. First, you had the rationalists. These were your Descartes, your Spinozas. And then later on, you had your empiricists, your Locke's, your Berkeleys, your Humes.
Yeah.
And for me, the most important part of all of this begins with Hume, because Hume kind of lays down this very skeptical idea of epistemology. This really, we can only know the things which we directly perceive.
Yeah.
And he initially came up with this idea called copy principle. And from the copy principle, he derived other notions of how we come to know things, or rather how we come to form things inside of our mind.
Okay.
And this was very compelling.
No.
Sorry, what?
No, keep going. I want you to explain where you're going with this. Sorry, go on. I don't want to worry about boring people. I think this is all really important. So. Yeah.
Well, Hume was one of the good guys, in my opinion. Hume was he really started out what I think constitutes a really good epistemology for.
Well, before we start getting into that, let's just clarify the main points of contention between the rationalists and the empiricists a bit more clearly, because as I understand it, the rationalists were not sure that they could rely on their own senses.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And so they decided that empirical reality wasn't necessarily true, whereas the empiricists, as I understand it, were saying, well, how we can't tell, so let's just go with it.
Well, the main point of the empiricists was that you only really know things as a result of experience. The only reason you can envision a golden mountain, for example, is because you've seen gold and you've seen mountains, and you sort of combine those two concepts. So even though you've never seen a gold mountain in real life, your ability to formulate that thought in your mind comes from your knowledge of these separate entities. And the same holds true for literally everything. So everything comes from experience.
Yeah.
Whereas the rationalists, they said, well, you can reason the existence of anything. You just need to know logic. You just need to you can basically sit in a cave and philosophize the truth. So yeah, that was that.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Carry on. What was Hume's contentions here?
Well, Hume was of the empiricist camp, and he was sort of the epitome of empiricism. He was an outspoken atheist, which was not a very easy thing to be in the 1700s. And the argument really began when Immanuel Kant came along, and in 1781, published a critique of pure reason, which was his answer to this argument between the empiricists and the rationalists. And in it, he introduces his epistemology called transcendental idealism. And it's really here where everything begins. It's really from here that you can draw a line all the way to intersectionality.
Right. Okay.
But there are a lot of bumps in the road, and I guess we're going to cover those bumps.
Yeah, I've only read the fundamental the principles of metaphysics. That's the only Kant I've read so far. So do you want to tell us exactly why that drew the line? What was it about, and how did it set the stage?
Well, it started out by laying out categories of knowledge. There's a priori knowledge and there's a posteriori knowledge. And I want to look up exactly what this means because my conception of those aren't really perfect. But I know a priori. Okay.
That means prior.
So
before.
Yeah. So basically, a priori versus a posteriori. That's your rationalist versus empiricist. A priori is knowledge independent of all experiences, your rationalist position. And you have a posteriori, which is knowledge deriving from experience. And you have another two categories of knowledge called, I think it was called Hume's fork. Let me verify that really quickly. Hume's fork. And there are two other categories of knowledge. They're called synthetic propositions and analytic propositions. The synthetic propositions would be matters of real experience and matters of fact, the sort of things that that empiricists were dealing with.
Yeah.
The physical world that they play around with. Any statement about those constitutes synthetic propositions. Whereas with relations of ideas, like between numbers and mathematics and logic, these would be of the analytic camp.
So these would be the things that are objectively true for everyone.
Yes.
And the synthetic would be the subjective experiences of individuals.
I'm not entirely sure of that. When it comes to synthetic, it just really comes to the material, the physical, whereas analytic, the immaterial ideas and their relations.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Kant has these four categories laid out, and you have a priori, you have a posteriori, you have synthetic, and you have analytic. And he starts combining them. He starts. You can imagine maybe a Punnett square, where for two of the sides you lay out a synthetic and an analytic, and then for two of the other sides you lay out the a priori and a posteriori. So you end up with four potential categories. The first one is synthetic a posteriori. This is knowledge about the physical world that you gain as a result of experience. So that's one category of knowledge. You have analytic a posteriori. I don't remember whether that's the one that exists or not. I know there's also analytic there's also analytic. Hang on, sorry.
Yeah, I've just got the Wikipedia up now for both of those. So so analytic posteriori would be analytic propositions are true by virtue of their meaning, as in mathematical proofs and whatnot. And a posteriori would presumably be something that has been demonstrated.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, and there's also a category of analytic that Kant argued didn't exist. That might be analytic a priori. But anyway, the really important one that you need to consider is synthetic a priori. And that's the one that really changes the game.
Okay, go on.
And he argues that there are some synthetic propositions about the physical material world that we know innately, that we know a priori. And he gives, as an example, space and time. Space and time would be examples of a priori synthetic knowledge. He's in A Critique of Pure Reason, he lays out sort of the framework for transcendental idealism and how it logically operates. And he proceeds to argue for its validity via a Platonic dialectic. That's sort of, you present a thesis and you present an antithesis. You present you present a proposition and you present the negation of that proposition, and you sort of evaluate the idea as a result of this argument. This is the Platonic version of dialectics, and later on it gets twisted into something else. But right now, what he does is he lays out the way empiricists and rationalists would argue over space and time. So, for example, he would present the thesis, space and time have a beginning. This is the position of the rationalists. Then the empiricists, they present the antithesis. That's space and time are infinite. And then Immanuel Kant would say, okay, the truth is both of these are false. Space and time are synthetic, but these assertions are not backed by observation. This is an example of synthetic a priori. This is a proposition which is not logically or analytically contained within the subject about something that's physical and real. Are we so far on the same page?
Well, I think we are.
Okay.
I'm waiting for the conclusion of all of this so I can see whether I am on the same page. But I think I'm keeping up.
Yeah. So basically, he says, okay, he makes this negotiation between the empiricists and the rationalists. There are some arguments they have, the empiricists and rationalists, which, when you look at them through Kant's transcendental idealism, they both turn out to be correct. And others, they both turn out to be false. Anyway, his thesis, broadly understood, was that knowledge, experience, and reality are bound by our senses, but shaped by our reasoning, and that the conditions that bound and shape our conceptions of truth are best understood through philosophical reflection rather than through empirical inquiry. And this introspective approach sort of initiated the continental tradition. Kant, before Kant, there was this tendency for philosophy to either be Aristotelian or Platonic. But since Kant sort of negotiated the two with his transcendental idealism, you now have these two new categories, the analytic tradition and the continental tradition. And as we'll see, the continental tradition has a lot of vapid, vacuous.
Yeah, so basically what we're talking about is the birth of postmodernism, really.
Well, that doesn't come till the 1970s, but yeah, this sort of, you do eventually draw a line from this to postmodernism.
Yeah, the foundations of it, then, I should say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right now, yeah.
Oh, sorry, no, carry on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, yeah. Right now we're just getting into modernism. Kant sort of marks the end of the Enlightenment and the beginning of the Romantic period, where modernism really starts to take off. Okay.
So, what does this do to continental philosophy?
Well, it sort of starts it. It begins it.
Yeah, but I mean, how, would you like to talk people through this? Is what I mean. It's like, how does this influence it, and what can you talk us down the road?
Yeah, so I want you to keep in mind until the very end this notion of spectacles, these lenses that you can put on. We all have lenses, is what Kant is really arguing. And we are looking at the world through these lenses. And we can never take them off. We always have these lenses on. So we can never be 100% completely sure whether the world that we think we're experiencing is actually the world we're experiencing, or whether we're plugged into the matrix or something. And this idea of lenses, it later takes on a very new, and to your channel, very familiar element.
Yes, that's exactly why we're doing this. Okay, so who exactly sort of was instrumental in the formation of this method of thinking, and what did they exactly come out with?
Well, this was Kant in the beginning, but before you end up with all of this stuff that comes on with the cultural sort of lenses, there are a few steps in the way. Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, let's move on to the beginning of the Romantic period, where you have German idealism, existentialism, and phenomenology arise. These are the things that are really going to start kicking everything off. So it all starts with Hegel. Hegel responded to Kant at the turn of the 19th century by saying that Kant's antimonies, the thesis and the antithesis, the argument between the rationalists and the empiricists, and this true resolution that he made between them, that's called an antimony. Mm-hmm. He said that these antimonies are found in ideas everywhere in history, not just in Kant's specific cases. And he saw history as a series of periods in which some philosophies thrived, followed by periods in which reacting ideas thrived. So Kant's thesis would no longer be restricted to our perceptions of reality, but it would now encompass our entire thought process. That's how Hegel went ahead and modified Kant.
That's interesting, actually, because I mean that is, you know, the idea of the lens is metaphorically saying that's exactly what's happening. It's not, you know, it's not just the end result. It's everything leading up to people then spouting that black people can't be racist. If I understand that correctly.
Yeah, basically what Hegel was saying is that our philosophies are the product of our time. They are reactions to philosophies of previous times. And we need to pick the best parts from history, the chivalry and honor from medieval times, say, because, you know, that's when that philosophy was at its best. Pick up introspection from the Enlightenment. That's when that idea was at its best. Pick up all of the best parts of history from the best times. Go to this like treasure box of history and pick out the things that are useful. And you do this to find balance. And you take all of these best ideas from history, and this would be like a project of human emancipation.
Yeah, you're not actually looking for balance, are you? Looking for excellence. That's what you're
looking for synthesis. You have a thesis, you have an antithesis, and later, eventually, you have a synthesis. You have one idea, you have the reacting idea, and eventually, you have the right idea that's somewhere in between.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. You're not looking to merely have a good idea and a bad idea. You're looking through history to find all of the good ideas and then presumably put them into practice.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
And this. Sorry, what?
Oh yeah, and I would just term that as excellence. I mean, you know, because like you're saying, all of these things were produced because of conditions at the time, you know, and without these conditions, there's no real reason that they would have been produced. And so you don't want the bad conditions that caused the good idea to surface. You just want the good idea. But I mean, I think you've always got to remember why the good idea came about in the first place, don't you? Otherwise it loses its sort of definition. Even if it can be shown to be like an objective truth almost.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this process of thesis and antithesis defining the course of history, this is what's known as Hegelian dialectics. So it's different from the traditional Platonic dialectics in that this version of dialectics gives an account of history. It's ontologically historicist. It says that dialectics, conflict, is what defines the course of history.
Right. Okay. So, and just to stop there, then, how is it different from Platonic? Because I assume that Platonic is just, I mean, it's true regardless of context, right?
With Platonic, it's more of a method of argumentation rather than a statement of history.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's what I was trying to say.
I hear you. Yeah, this is all tricky stuff.
Yeah,
I'm probably not presenting it perfectly, but I think that the essence of what I'm presenting, you know, it rings, and some of this probably sounds very familiar. History is being.
Sorry, yeah,
history.
And I just wanted to be clear that I'm keeping up. You know, that's the thing, because I have read quite widely, and I've read many of the authors we're talking about now, but not everything, and I haven't done any studying on it outside of these books, not beyond Wikipedia anyway. So I'm familiar. I'm familiar with a lot of this, but I'm not by far an expert, you know. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
I'm not a philosopher myself, but my association with these notions were brought about by being under the supervision of a philosopher who's sympathetic to this anti-SJW thing. He's a professor on our campus, and he has to be very quiet about things. He's
of course
the politics on campus and on most campuses these days are nuts. You have one side of campus, and they're sort of staring angrily at the other side of campus because one side of campus knows that the other side is talking a lot of shit, and the other side is like, why aren't you believing the shit we're talking? So it's, you think you're better than us. It's the science wars all over again.
Oh, don't worry. I think that my audience is well aware of the bullshit going on campuses at the moment, and I don't think anyone would begrudge this guy for not being able to speak out because, well, that's the environment they've fostered, isn't it? But okay, so yeah, let's carry on then. Now that I'm pretty sure I'm still with you.
Yeah, well, this notion of theory being defined as a series of conflicts, can you think of anything, any philosophy at all that came about in the last 200 years that seems to follow that route?
Well, I mean, sorry, the route of the sort of
This
continental road.
this particular notion of history, that you can define history, you can have this theory of history that is defined by
Marxism,
conflict.
obviously. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
that's the key. I mean, everything about Marxism is the history of. I mean, literally, they say it's the history of class conflict. You know, that history is the history of class conflict.
Mhm.
And if
Yeah,
you're
so
looking at it through one lens, it is. You know, it's also the history of religious conflict. If you put a religious lens on, you know, so yeah, I can.
Yeah, but Marx takes this Hegelian idea of conflict and he materializes it. He turns it into a class issue.
Yes.
He says, yes, the history of our world is defined by conflict, but that conflict is between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And he even called himself like the disciple of Hegel. Hegel was a very primary influence of his.
So to use sort of Kant's dialect, then this would be
Hegel's Hegelian dialect.
Yeah, well, no, or Kant's terminology then. This would be a synthetic proposition then, because he's applying it to the meaning and relation of the world.
Well, yes, actually, no.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
The development of this theory is not deductive, in which case it would be analytical. And this for synthetic propositions, it's normally induction and science in particular abduction. But in the case of an analytical notion, this relation of ideas, the development would have to be deductive. But Hegel's development and later Marx's is mainly phenomenological. They try to understand the structure of the consciousness of the time.
Okay.
The underlying, you understand the notion of this collectivized consciousness of certain groups.
I assume what they're talking about when they say that is basically culture.
That is a way of looking at it. It's a little bit nuanced.
Well, go ahead. What's the nuances? Like I said, these are all things I've heard of.
It's not
necessarily I'm an expert on.
Well, here's the thing about continental philosophy and in trying to explain its properties. You ever heard the saying about a bunch of monkeys in a room with typewriters? How eventually
the works of Shakespeare, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to add a caveat to that. Within the first 2 weeks, they're going to produce the complete works of Hegel.
Okay.
That is how badly continental philosophy is written. Hegel in particular. I've tried reading his Phenomenology of Spirit, where he laid all of this out, and I couldn't. If you want to know what verbal diarrhea looks like physically, synthetically, look at Hegel.
Okay, I'll definitely read. At the moment, I'm currently going through Shulamith. Isn't it Shulamith? I think it's Seth. Is it? What's Falguni Seth? I think it is. Who wrote the political understanding of race or something. I'm currently reading through that, and it's just the most abominable thing I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, tell me if it sounds familiar to this. This is just Marxism in a nutshell.
Oh, sorry, go on. Yeah.
The workers produce, the capitalists pay them for their labor, but a tension exists between the capitalists and the workers because all the capitalists do is own the means of production. The workers keep the system running. It was the same with feudalism. Nobles owned the land, the peasants tilled it, but the tension existed between them for the same reason, and that tension broke with the French Revolution. But then the cycle repeated, this time with capitalists and workers. So to break the cycle, you have to make the workers aware of their trap. That's consciousness raising. And you have to organize the revolution where the means of production are seized for the collective, a vanguard of the proletariat prevents the reemergence of the capitalists, and everything somehow eventually dissolves into a utopia.
Well, it dissolves into Animal Farm, doesn't it? I mean, the very idea that some of the proletariat will now be governing the rest is obviously going to create a new class of capitalists. I mean, Orwell was right. That's
worse. Worse.
Worse. Sorry, a new aristocracy. Sorry, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah, it was actually Mikhail Bakunin, who was an anarchist at the time, who wasn't fond of the historicism, but who agreed that you needed to collectivize the means of production. He said that if you have a vanguard of the proletariat, you're going to end up with something much worse. You're going to end up with this dictatorship, as in the modern sense of the word dictatorship. Back then, it meant something a little different. And he was right. This was a very prescient point that he made. Lenin, in What Is to Be Done, pretty much outlined how this somehow would occur. It wouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's the most wishful thinking. The idea that it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. And later on, neo-Marxists, they're going to come along and they're going to try to explain why Marxism didn't produce this glorious utopia, why it instead produced these awful despotic regimes. And they're not going to go with the obvious solution. Well, it's because you had a fucking vanguard. Marxists will do what Marxists will do. The alternatives to them would be unacceptable. It would be classical anarchism, or it would be capitalism. And to a Marxist or a neo-Marxist, both of those, especially if you're very heavily involved, both of those are unacceptable.
No, I agree.
Yeah. And even though anarchism is to the left, along with Marxism, anarchism generally rejects historical materialism and always rejects the vanguard of the proletariat. So it's not as emotionally gratifying as Marxism tends to be.
No,
you don't get to feel like you're.
It's nowhere near as successful either because of that.
Yeah, and also the few anarchist societies that did exist, they were eventually conquered either by Stalinists or fascists. It's hard to defend your country if it's completely anarchistic.
Yeah, so. It's ridiculous. The idea that an anarchist state could exist in a world that has non-anarchist states is just it's a joke. It couldn't happen. If
anarchism were to ever work, it would require everybody to gradually be heading in that direction.
Yeah.
But you have a lot of young revolutionaries, and they don't want. And the same with Marxists. You also have a lot of revolutionaries. They don't want to wait. They have to have their own way, and they have to have it now. Negotiating and having a gradual political praxis that's not acceptable. Yeah. Give us what we want now. Give it, or we'll shut it down.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, so let's carry on where we left off. Sorry.
Yeah. So Hegel and then Marx materializes Hegel's dialectics, and the game is on now. But in between the two, you have Schopenhauer, who I really like mainly because he hates Hegel.
Okay.
No, but he publishes The World as Will and Representation some 30 years before the Communist Manifesto comes out.
Mm-hmm.
And it is hilariously morose. I encourage anybody to read it. Schopenhauer's a lot of fun, and he takes a lot of pot shots at other continentalists. He criticized Hegel for vapid and vacuous work, and The World as Will and Representation drew a very pessimistic picture of reality, which is very inspirational to existentialists like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. They're pretty big, and it also influences the neo-Kantians. They're also a big piece of this puzzle. And later on, he's a huge influence on Freud, which sucks.
Well, yeah.
Because Schopenhauer is great, and his legacy has really been dirtied, I think, by all of these assholes who took his ideas and ran with it. And the same with Kant. Kant was a smart dude, but a bunch of assholes came along and they fucked it.
Okay, so Hegel's dialectic was the entire history of mankind is conflict, and then Marx decides actually it's class conflict that we need to talk about.
Yeah, Hegel's conflict was conflict of ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I meant, yeah, I should have said argument, really. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, so Marx materializes this by saying it's actually the physical conditions of the laborers versus the bourgeoisie that we need to be looking at. How do we go from there to SJWs?
Well, from that, the SJWs end up taking their own. What Marx has, it's called dialectical materialism. Obviously because he materialized this ideological dialectic. But more generally, if you have these ideologies where there is a conflict, and the conflict is between Group A and Group B, the oppressor and the oppressed, that's called historical materialism.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a generalization. There are many flavors of historical materialism, and dialectical materialism is just one of them. There was a book published called The Dialectic of Sex. You maybe have heard of it.
I think
if
I've
not,
actually
you
got
should.
it.
Yeah.
It's on my reading list, actually, over in the corner.
Put it on the front, because that one is going to illuminate so much. It basically does to men and women what Marx did to classes.
Yeah, no, I do have it. It's Schulenmith Firestone. That was the other one. So who was it? I think it was Laurie Penny who recommended this to me. So I thought, okay, I'll get a copy of it, but I haven't taken the time to read it yet.
She would.
Of course she would. Yeah, that's the reason I got it. She was like, "Have you read The Dialectic of Sex?" I was like, "I will," because it's clearly some important bullshit that you've internalized and decided to. I don't. Well,
it is central to this particular flavor of bullshit.
Yeah. Okay. So this is sort of gendered historic materialism.
Mm-hmm. And you can also have the racial version of this. The Black Power movement was very much based on this. Their vanguard were the Black Panther. I'll get to all of that later.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm well aware of the sort of the Marxist trend in many Black activist communities, as I've done on my channel. But sorry, yeah, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, and you can do the same thing with gays versus straights. That hasn't been as successful, but they're trying.
Yeah, and anything that you could, as a class, that could be in conflict with a larger, presumably more powerful group, could be done like this, couldn't it? I mean,
yes, definitely. And I know some people like to call this cultural Marxism, and I can see why. But I would recommend against that, because there tends to be an association with conspiratorial thinking.
Yeah,
if you use that term.
I try to avoid using the term cultural Marxism. I just call it Marxism because that's what it is. There's no
because even though we're going to be talking.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, because even though we're going to get to the Frankfurt School and their critical theory, there are some people who take it way too far, and they talk about the Frankfurt School like it was this evil communist Jewish conspiracy to try to turn America into this horrible communist state. No, this was just some German Jews escaping the Holocaust who happened to be bad, albeit influential sociologists. This ultimately comes from bad reasoning. It does not, I think, ultimately come from malice. And I think that it could potentially be reformed.
Okay.
The reason I think that is because around the same time as, well, somewhere between Schopenhauer and Marx, you have the rise of the French. All of this that's happening with Kant and Hegel, Marx, Schopenhauer, and the German idealists who come after. This is all happening in Germany. But meanwhile, in France, you have the rise of what's called positivism. And it begins with Auguste Comte. And positivism is basically, it leans more in the direction of Hume, albeit with some acknowledgement of Kant. It's very strongly influenced by Hume. It's a very empirical, very straightforward methodological approach, as opposed to what you end up with today, what you end up with later on. It was devised by the Neo-Kantians, this opposition to positivism that I'll get to. But the first person to actually try to apply positivist principles to sociology was Emil Durkheim, who also came a little bit later. He came out around somewhere between Marx and the Neo-Kantians. The Neo-Kantians came out in the 1860s, 1870s. Marx was at the end of the 1840s. So I would suspect Emil Durkheim came around at around the 1850s, but that's just my guess. I don't remember exactly when he was around.
Right. Okay.
But anyway, the Neo-Kantians came along, and they were really annoyed at this materialization of Kant's ideology. So they formed this sort of back to Kant movement. They didn't reject socialism though, because Kant had this idea of ethics called the deontological approach. Basically the secular version of the golden rule. Treat your neighbor as you would treat yourself.
Yeah.
And this is very compatible with socialism. It rings very well. If you take it to its extremes, which the Neo-Kantians did. So they took socialism on board, and when they were developing their social theories, they did orient it in the direction of Marxism. They had a very Hegelian reading of Kant, which is unfortunate, and it turned into a shit show.
Yeah, no, I'm actually a bit confused by the idea of a Hegelian reading of Kant. I mean, like I said, I've only read one book by him, but he didn't seem to be pushing that kind of angle. How does it relate? How exactly does that happen?
Well, you basically apply the continental approach, the phenomenological approach, and you try to understand Kant in the context of his time, the context of his time. Yeah, everybody's probably telling me to kill myself now, but whatchamacallit, you try to understand what the factors are that led Kant to believe this, and how this dialectic throughout history led to Kant, and how you can sort of try to extricate yourself from it. This idea later culminates in somebody else I'm going to get to, but for the time being, you wanna remember that the Neo-Kantians have two schools, two main schools. One of them is the interpretativists. These are the people who are reacting to positivism. They want to say that the social world can't be understood methodologically the same way the natural sciences do. You can't really understand things in these particular terms. And there are some reasons for that I'll get to, some justifications that are come up with for that, and are developed by the people who come along between the Neo-Kantians and the development of critical theory. We're still in the 1850s, or 1860s, 1870s right now. We got another 50 or so years to get to before critical theory comes around. So this anti-positivism, this interpretivism gets refined in that time period, at least to the extent that one can refine shit.
Okay.
Anyway, in the meantime, you have the existentialists I mentioned earlier, mainly Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, and they also have an influence on the people who follow. But anyway, I said there were two schools of Neo-Kantians. One of them are the interpretivists, and the other one are the phenomenologists. These are the people who try to understand society in terms of consciousness, in terms of the contents of people's minds. And this has a very heavy influence on Freud and other bullshit psychoanalysis. And that, of course, is very strongly applied by people who utilize critical theory. When you look at sociology today, or the social sciences today, and you look in particular at the ones that use anti-positivist methodology, or even methodology that tries to negotiate between the two but still falls short, you do see something that is more like applied philosophy than it is, science. And one could argue that science is itself applied philosophy, but the difference is that science actually produces real results. Whatever the interpretivists do, whatever their allies do, that does not resemble science. It doesn't work. It's just ideology masquerading as academics. I think a good part of this is because the Neo-Kantians and their existentialist allies really oriented their ideology toward Marxism. The existentialists were more than happy to pick up socialism. The reason was because they thought capitalism was one of the things responsible for existential angst, which they thought was unhealthy for society. So they thought socialism would free people from that.
Right, okay, because that's interesting, because, I mean, I'm just looking at a definition of existentialism as you were talking.
Yeah.
And the definition that's given on philosophybasics.com is existentialism is a philosophy that emphasizes individual existence, freedom, and choice. It's the view that humans define their own meaning in life and try to make rational decisions despite existing in an irrational universe. It focuses on the question of human existence and the feeling that there is no purpose or explanation at the core of existence. It holds that there is no God or any other transcendent force, and the only way to counter this nothingness and hence find meaning in life is by embracing existence. Thus, existentialism believes that individuals are entirely free and must take personal responsibility for themselves, although with this responsibility comes angst, a profound anguish or dread. It therefore emphasizes action, freedom, and decision as fundamental, and holds the only way to rise above the essentially absurd condition of humanity, which is characterized by suffering and inevitable death, is by exercising our personal freedom and choice, a complete rejection of determinism. Now, that's very interesting how they would adopt socialism then, specifically Marxism, because it seems to be, well, opposed to what they're suggesting here.
Well, in retrospect, yeah. When you look at Leninism and Stalinism, Maoism, it does seem opposed. But back in the day when none of these experiments...
Well, you know, just the very concepts of Marxism just seem opposed to this. I mean, the whole... That's in fact the deepest problem I have with Marxism, is it's completely against the idea of individual agency. It's directly opposed to it. I mean, it literally doesn't account for it. And so I find it very strange that anyone
I guess
would.
I guess my explanation of all of this is that the existentialists themselves were not necessarily neo-Kantians. The neo-Kantians consisted of the interpretativists and the phenomenologists. But the existentialists, along with the neo-Kantians, had a huge influence on the two main characters who come next, and that would be Heidegger and Weber.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's carry on to them then, because, like I said, at the moment I'm a bit confounded as to how these two things can not be doublethink to someone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to hold a Marxist viewpoint at any rate, along with any viewpoint most people would consider reasonable, that does, I think, requires some degree of doublethink.
I agree.
Regardless of what your ideologies are. But anyway, let me think for a second. Where was I? Yeah, so the existentialists, they see many woes of modern society as being due to capitalism. I guess they also thought that these social forces produced by capitalism sort of enslaved people. People were laboring for income rather than for personal fulfillment. And I guess that's what they mainly took issue with. When it came to the rest of Marxist precepts, it's tricky. So I don't know exactly what their arguments are. Like I said, I'm not that deeply acquainted with the material, but I am reasonably certain that the majority of them were Marxists, or at least some flavor of socialist.
Okay.
Yeah, and the phenomenologists, again, they thought that Kant's duty-based ethics complemented socialism. And they also used his... They also used his transcendental idealist thesis in developing their interpretative methods and paradigms, to eventually have the development of things like reflexivity and double hermeneutic. The double hermeneutic in particular, I believe it was, let me think, was it Martin Heidegger or, no, hang on, I think it was Max Weber who came out with, it was either Weber or Heidegger, who came out with the notion of a double hermeneutic. And the notion is there is a relationship between sociologists and society. And it's a two-way relationship. It's not the same as with the chemist and the chemicals that the chemist is working with. The chemist can do things to the chemicals in the lab, but the chemicals in the lab aren't affecting the chemist's knowledge of those chemicals. With the sociologists and society, that's not how it works, according to this notion of the double hermeneutic.
So the idea basically is they're too close to their subject to objectively study it.
Yeah, they are wearing the lenses of Kant, except now they're applying it to society, not merely the physical world.
Right. Okay.
They also have this idea of reflexivity. That's the tendency of researchers to impose their own bias onto experiments, which produces results affected by their research. That's the sociological analog of the observer effect. How non-negligible disturbances basically fuck whatever it is you're trying to understand.
Yeah, and we know this happens constantly in social science. So
yeah, well, they acknowledge it, and they do it on purpose. They say that because these things exist, objectivity is not possible in social research. So
don't try.
Why even try?
Yeah, that's ever since the beginning of Gamergate. That was basically one of their major contentions against the concept of objectivity. It's like, well, it's impossible for a human to ever be perfectly objective, so there's no point trying to be even vaguely objective. And it was just the most incredible thing I'd ever heard. I absolutely gobsmacked. I mean, the rationale you might never achieve your goal, so what's the point in trying, is just absurd. I mean, the journey is more important than the destination, is it not? I just find it incredible. Just abandon any standards, because you'll never achieve perfection. It's like, okay, great.
Yeah. So along come Weber and Heidegger. And Weber's biggest contribution, I'm told, is this notion of the Protestant work ethic, which he thought was the primary motivation for capitalism. He says that capitalism doesn't work in non-Protestant countries because they are more spiritually enlightened. They're more existentialist and less angsty. So capitalism, they would recognize capitalism as this evil oppressive force, so they don't go with it. That's why third world countries, are not capitalists. They're better than us spiritually. Not us. I mean, not us in terms of like us capitalists. I mean us in terms of like first world countries.
Right. Okay. So because of their lack of luxury.
I guess that would play into it. I think he was thinking, particularly he had like Buddhists in mind. The Buddhists really influenced Schopenhauer's philosophy, and Schopenhauer in turn influenced a lot of these other people, which, like I said, is unfortunate because Schopenhauer is a boss.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So basically they're saying that isn't this some sort of allusion to standpoint theory, that the oppressed have some greater knowledge than their oppressor?
I guess that could be considered related to this, but standpoint theory actually originates with Marx and Engels when they're thinking of factory workers and the foreman. The foreman knows what the foreman wants, and the factory workers know what the foreman wants. They have to know. They're incentivized to know, but they also know what they want. So where the foreman only understands his own perspective, the factory workers understand the foreman's perspective and their own, and this is called double vision. When you apply this to like a woman living in a man's world or a black living in a white supremacist country, you can see how that might get appropriated to suit that particular.
And I mean that's not necessarily false either, but it just abandons the concept of empathy, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's one criticism.
Yeah, that's the major criticism that strikes me at just first blush.
Yeah, standpoint theory is not good in my opinion.
No, I don't think anyone has a high opinion of it other than Steve Shives.
Well, I can't speak for Steve Shives, but
I only know because Gary Edwards did a video on it, mocking him. I hadn't seen him defending it, and Gary Edwards was just like, "My God, what are you doing? Stop, you madman!"
Well, that video was actually the conversation that I had with Steve. That Gary was responding to.
Oh, right, okay. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. Me and Steve had a talk a while back, and we were talking about standpoint, and I was offering the issues that I took with it. But anyway.
How quickly did he block you?
No, he and I are on cordial terms.
Oh, good.
So yeah.
Okay, so yeah, let's carry on then. As like I said, I think I'm still keeping up. So
Yeah, so Weber's big contribution is this idea that cultural influences play a greater role in shaping capitalism than Marx's dialectical thesis. This later gets appropriated, it's both cultural influences and, the history of conflict that led up to
yeah,
this.
the sort of material circumstances.
Yeah, yeah. So for Weber in particular, it was the Protestant work ethic. It was the church that was responsible for capitalism and responsible for keeping everybody in line with capitalism.
I presume that'd be why communists were so anti-religion then.
Yeah. Well, communists aren't the only anti-religious people.
Oh no,
yeah.
I know. But that would go a long way to explaining why communism is virulently anti-religious. Not only is it a privileged landed class, but they're also influencing capitalism with their Protestant work ethic.
Yeah, and I think this goes a long way to explain why there was such a big schism in the atheist YouTube community a few years ago. A lot of people came into atheism because they thought it was this oppressive evil. They thought religion was this oppressive evil force. A lot of atheists believe that.
Yeah.
But some atheists come into it. This is why they oppose religion.
Sorry, say again. I missed that. So this is why what?
This is why atheists oppose it.
Right.
Or this is why these atheists oppose it. This is why these atheists are atheists. They if there was some religion that did not involve religion, they would go for it still.
I mean, this actually seems to be Stefan Molyneux's position on it, doesn't it? Because he did a video saying why I was wrong about atheism, and then went on to talk about the state. And I was sat there thinking, how does any of this prove God? I didn't watch the whole video, so he probably did stress that he wasn't talking about the existence of God. He was probably talking about atheism as a social movement, blah, blah, blah. But still, I mean, it's a bizarre way to characterize anything. And like you say, it's not that they don't think there isn't a God. It's because they think religion is oppressive. Yeah,
that would be my suspicion. For me personally, and I think for most of the atheists on YouTube, we were atheists because we don't believe the claims that are being made about God and about religion, the claims made by religion. We don't think that they hold water. And it's true that religion is generally an oppressive force, but that's not, our motivation for being atheists.
No, and it's not universal either. There are religions that are oppressive, so. I mean, don't get me wrong. I agree that there's no evidence for God, and I agree that some religions are very oppressive and should be fought at every turn. But, like I say, it shouldn't be the focus of why someone is an atheist. I mean, that just makes you a contrarian. Sorry, let's carry on. Because, like I said, I think I'm keeping up. So,
So, hermeneutics plays a very big role in all of this, and there are very different types of hermeneutics. There are several different types. Give me a second. I have a list here somewhere. No, sorry. Phenomenology. I wanted to talk about phenomenology right now.
Okay. Would you like to define phenomenology for me?
So, phenomenology is the philosophical study of the structures of experience and consciousness. And that, if that sounds like a vague definition, that's because this comes out of the continental tradition. So, get used to it.
Oh, I will.
But there are different varieties of phenomenology. You have transcendental constitutive phenomenology, which studies how objects are constituted in transcendental consciousness. It sets aside any questions of any relation to the natural world. You have naturalistic constitutive phenomenology. This is the naturalistic version of it. This is the not crazy version. It studies how consciousness constitutes things in the world of nature, assuming the natural attitude that consciousness is part of nature. This would be the attitude taken by neuroscientists, whereas the transcendental one is the one taken aside by hippies.
Yeah, the idea that the consciousness doesn't arise in the brain, effectively.
Yeah.
Because the brain being an organ is obviously part of the natural world. So you know, anything that arises from it is going to be rooted in the natural world. Am I understanding that?
That sounds about right.
Okay.
And then you have generative historicist phenomenology, which studies how meaning, as found in our experience, is generated by historical processes of collective experience. That one is huge in the types of topics we're talking about. There's hermeneutical phenomenology, which studies the interpretative structures of experience. And it's, you know, I think the most important ones to take on board to consider when we're thinking about these different social movements, these the so-called SJWs. The most important phenomenologies to think about are transcendental phenomenology, the generative historicist phenomenology, and the hermeneutical phenomenology. Again, how objects are constituted in transcendental consciousness, how collectivized experience over history shapes collective consciousness. And hang on, there's some loud assholes passing by.
No worries. Okay, so
yeah, I'm in an empty classroom, and there's going to be a concert starting soon. So
right, okay,
yeah,
yeah, okay, so yeah, I mean that sounds to me like they're talking about culture. You know, they're talking about the you know, sort of cultural attitudes and, you know, memories that are kept alive just by people talking, really.
Yeah, and yeah, so basically, what I said about Weber and how cultural influences are what shape our interpretations of everything, that generally starts and is refined by Weber. Meanwhile, Heidegger, he's this very dippy, very hippy-dippy, very in the moment kind of self-righteous, pseudo-enlightened, false profundity type of guy. He's the kind of guy Gad Saad would be very happy to destroy. I'm not a fan of Heidegger. You know, whatever I said about Hegel, apply it to Heidegger as well.
Right.
You know, just think of his philosophy as, dude, get high on life, recognize the interconnectedness of all things, and transcend the social norms and invisible social structures which contain and constrain us. And take another hit, dude.
On the plus side, he was probably a great surfer. But yeah, so let's carry on.
Yeah, so Heidegger and Weber, they really strongly influence the Frankfurt School.
Right.
And it's in 1937 that Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and a few others, they come together and they invent critical theory. And critical theory is the method. It's sort of the means by which this school of social theorists evaluate society. They take all of these ideas we've been talking about so far, and they use that to evaluate society. And by this time, you know, Stalin had come up, Hitler was rising. They were thinking, okay, why is socialism doing so badly? What's wrong? Why are all of these dictatorships arising? Why aren't we getting our utopias? So they come out with neo-Marxism, and the goal of neo-Marxism is to try to understand what went wrong with orthodox and, to a lesser extent, reform Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
Why did everything get so fucked?
And what conclusions did they come
to? Basically, it's everybody else's fault and not Marxist.
That's brilliant. I really, really like that. That's the answer.
Well, perfect. Were you expecting anything else?
No, mate, I didn't even know what they were going to say, because anything that they say means you can't really be a Marxist. So of course, yeah, I don't even know. You know, of course, it's got to be everyone else's fault.
Yeah. You know, it was either Stalin went and perverted Lenin, or Lenin went and he perverted Marx. Whoever it is, you wanna put the blame on. It's their fault.
That's. I mean, that's literally the argument I've had with every Marxist. Is, you know, no true Marxists, basically. And I'm just like, look, you understand that you're dealing with imperfect vessels, and you're saying that they are not perfect and therefore not doing Marx correctly. But we can make these imperfect vessels do Marx correctly, even though the problem is that they are imperfect vessels. It's like, look, you can't do it, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. You know, Noam Chomsky, I heard him talk about Julia Kristeva, one of the postmodernists who comes about later. She sort of starts out, she brings she brings neo-Marxism to feminism, and basically works on that enterprise. And she used to be a Maoist before it turned out Mao was an evil bastard.
Really?
And
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and Noam Chomsky, he was talking to her about it. He's like, well, why didn't you get on board with the rest of us when we were saying Mao was an evil bastard? And she's like, well, I didn't know. And ultimately, this is not a disproof of Marxism. This was not Marx's fault. This was Mao's fault. And I realize that now, which is why, even though I'm still a Marxist, I'm not a Maoist anymore. So, leave me alone, Noam.
Okay, can she give an example of a real-world Marxist that she would consider herself as? I mean, like, is there anyone?
I guess you could call it a Christjoven. I don't know.
A what, sorry?
So, a Christjoven. Her name is Julia Christjoven.
I'm not familiar with her.
This is the woman we're talking about, the one who Noam Chomsky was.
Oh, sorry, I think you were talking about Shulamith Firestone, was it?
No, I think it was Julia Christjoven.
Right. Okay.
Maybe it was a different feminist of that time period that I'm getting wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Christjoven.
Right. Okay. No. I think I must have misheard you earlier. Okay. Okay. So yeah, obviously now it's everyone else's fault, but Marx's fault. But Marxism failed. So
yeah,
what's next?
Well, the first two generations of critical theorists, they're all modernists. Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and the others, they're the first generation. Later, you have guys like Richard Rorty come along, that's the second generation. They all try to explain why Marxism and socialism in general has led to authoritarianism. So they combine Marxism with phenomenological analysis, and they orient everything in the existentialist direction. The end result is a Marxism concerned with injustice imposed by the evolution of capitalism as an economic and a political force. And that is neo-Marxism. Capitalism is no longer just this evil economic force, it's an evil economic and political force. And it has poisoned Marxism. It's the capitalist's fault that Marxism did badly.
Well, I mean, that's kind of true.
Well,
that is kind of true. I mean, like, the capitalists happen to have an amazing society, while the Marxists are all living in abject poverty. I mean,
I'm just reminded. You hear about some of the like super unbelievably nutty feminists. They're just next level crazy, so crazy that even other feminists will acknowledge, yeah, these are the crazy ones. But they're evil only because of the patriarchy.
Yeah,
same deal, I think.
Yeah, but the thing is, isn't that like in opposition to existentialism though? Because I thought existentialism was about personal responsibility.
When it comes to a lot of these ideologies, people just pick and choose.
Oh yeah, okay. I thought it might have been the case then, because I'm looking at them as we've had them defined throughout this thing, and I'm just like, this is, you shouldn't be a Marxist if you're an existentialist. I mean, the whole idea is to disavow yourself of responsibility for your own personal station in life and blame the bourgeoisie or the patriarchy or whatever. That's something you have to fight, rather than taking responsibility and making yourself a better or different person.
Yeah, and it's Schopenhauer was the one who inspired the existentialists, and he didn't really live up to his own standards, but at least he took ownership of them. When he was out banging everything that breathed, as was contrary to what his ideology suggested you need to do in order to be happy. He wasn't blaming anybody else. He took ownership of it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
he was a self-aware hypocrite, but he was a hilarious one. Again, the world is will and representation.
Okay.
Definitely worth a read.
Okay, so the Frankfurt School invent critical theory.
Yes, and they're all neo-Marxists.
Yes.
They look at capitalism as an economic and political force, but they don't move on to things like race and sex quite yet. They initially come out with structuralism and studies of colonialism, try to understand how these things allowed for the proliferation of capitalism to get everybody deluded into believing that capitalism is normal and natural and healthy for a society. And when you get to the third generation of critical theorists, these are your Lacans, your Foucault, your Derridas, your Christjoves. These are the postmodernists. These are the people who take neo-Marxism and they apply it to social issues. And with this, you have the birth of identity politics.
Right. And sorry.
This was in 1968.
Yeah, and who are the people doing this? Sorry.
The most important figures I can remember right now are Derrida, Foucault, Lacan, and Kristeva.
Right. Okay.
And they all have their own deals. They all kind of suck for various reasons. Some of them do come up with good things, but for the most part, a lot of them, especially Foucault, in my opinion, were assholes. Jacques Derrida, he comes out with a form of semiotic analysis called deconstruction, which you might have heard of. It's developed within the context of phenomenology, and the idea is you take a text, you take something somebody says, and you sort of you take it apart and you try to find out, where it all comes from, where all of it originates. Somebody says something sexist, this would be one application of it. Mm-hmm. Somebody says something, and you somehow find a way that is sexist.
Yeah.
There's a video game. You look at every component of it and you deconstruct it, and hey, look, I found sexism.
I don't even think they have to deconstruct. I think the lens itself is just, it's got a set of rules that are set up as such that if you're not following them exactly, it's sexism by default. So, and it's in everything. So when,
but when determining what does constitute sexism, and even sexism where it doesn't appear to be sexism where if you look at an example of something that seems completely normal in an Anita Sarkeesian video, and you see how she makes these huge leaps of logic to explain why this thing is actually sexist.
Yeah, that's
what she's doing is
sorry, go on.
Yeah, she's not just looking at it through an ideological lens, and the ideological lens is there to when you combine it with this, it tells you how to deconstruct it and how to interpret what you deconstruct it.
Well, I don't even know if I'd characterize it like that though. It's more a case of it's not even a how to. It's just like putting the labels on things, and if it's not in the predefined acceptable order, then you don't need to deconstruct it. You can just point to it. That's why they say this is sexist, and it's just like, okay, because it's not feminist.
It's not always easy. It's not always that easy though. You can't just look at something and even if you're a feminist, or at least even if you're a feminist of this flavor, you have to. In some cases, it's difficult. Electrical outlets, they look like vaginas. They're sexist because you plug these things in, and it gives these things power. This is how men use women for power.
Yeah, I think the most relevant refutation to all of this, which I find to be just the idea that they think that some things can then exist that are not feminist or intersectional or whatever. They will constantly say things like, well, most games are a terrible video, a male protagonist killing, raping women or something, I don't know. And the thing is, even if any of this, maybe they are, and okay, so we change games, so now it's not most of them. They will still say, well, there are still these things that are doing this thing that's a problem. So at any point, they can pull out an example of this thing happening and determine that games have a problem because this thing exists. So it's one of those things where it's literally them taking a mile after you've given them an inch, which is why you can never give them an inch. But yes, let's carry on.
Yeah, I broadly agree there.
Yeah, I think
this is just one of the instruments they use to help them achieve this goal of saying everything is sexist, everything is racist.
Yeah, and it's because it's been set up not in a intersectional feminist framework, I guess. I was making a general statement there, but anyway, let's carry on.
Yeah. So when with the postmodernists, now they're not just looking at structuralism and colonialism and see how capitalism emerged as a result and how capitalism works within the framework of these things. Now they're using post-structuralism. Now they're using post-colonialism, and this applies these methods of analysis of these things to everything: race, sex, class, everything. Think of it as we were talking about neo-Marxism applied to men and women, the male and female dialectic. That would be this flavor of feminism, this material feminism. You do the same thing to black and white people, you end up with black Marxism. And again, that's the defining feature of the Black Power movement in the 70s. The Black Panthers are the vanguard of that movement.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up scaring the shit out of everybody. The 70s, they were a hard time.
Well, yeah, they were terrifying. I mean, you people like, is there any crossover between them and the Nation of Islam?
As far as I can tell, only where Malcolm X was concerned.
Right. Okay.
He was initially,
didn't they?
Yeah, he was initially part of the Nation of Islam, but he eventually ended up leaving, and he was a big figure for the Black Power movement. Set a lot of examples for them. But it was mainly, I think, Stokely Carmichael who influenced them. After the assassination of Martin Luther King, there was this big power vacuum in the civil rights movement, and Martin Luther King was operating under some very distinct ideologies. A sort of you can trace a line from Tolstoy, actually, who was a more moderate type of anarchist. You can draw a line from him to Gandhi to Martin Luther King, and you can really see that this ideology that King in the original civil rights movement, late 50s until late 60s, this was the line that they were going under. But in 1968, you have this revolution in France, this academic revolution. Postmodernism came about, mm-hmm. and you have this infection of the civil rights movement with neo-Marxism. And by the end of the 1970s, it completely takes hold. Which is unfortunate, because I think they should have kept on with the Tolstoyan anarchist tradition. But
okay.
Yeah. Anyway, the main reason for the rise of postmodernism at this time, I think, was because by the 1960s, positivism, that better alternative we were describing earlier, mm-hmm. Where things were,
based on reality. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it had taken a nasty turn, and it ended up dying. There was this flavor of positivism called logical positivism, which became excessively reductionist, greedily so.
Right. And what way do you mean that?
I mean, they basically tried to bring about the death of metaphysics. They tried to bring about an explanation of everything, strictly in terms of just basically reduce everything to their most fundamental physical constituents.
Are we talking like determinism here?
We're talking about ultra extreme super determinism.
Right. Okay.
I hate to use the word scientism, because it's used as a snarl word by the type of academics that I argue with, but that's basically what they were.
Right. Okay.
And when you take things to that kind of extreme, you're obviously gonna go wrong.
Oh yeah.
Karl Popper, who I think of as a hero in all of this, he did criticize them, and he did end up killing them. Not physically, philosophically, he killed them.
Yeah.
Thomas Kuhn, to a lesser extent, also did, but Kuhn, unfortunately, accidentally brought out a really nasty flavor of postmodernism, but it wasn't entirely his fault. But anyway, whatchamacallit, the Vienna Circle dies, logical positivism dies, this legacy of the French, it goes away, and instead you have the legacy of German idealism taking over, unchallenged. I think it was Gary Edwards who cheekily said, the French, as is their destiny, eventually surrendered to the Germans. It's a good line.
It is a good line. And inevitable. So, yeah.
Yeah, so by the early 1960s, positivism is dead. 1968, the French have their little revolution. As is their destiny? I don't know. And you have a lot of novelty coming about in the form of postmodernism, and it was unchallenged by the positivists this time because there were no positivists. This sort of thing was allowed to run freely without anybody really checking it.
So,
Um,
I mean, let's just define postmodernism quickly, just so people listening who don't know anything about this can have a bit more of a foundation on what we mean and why we're so opposed to it. Do you have a definition to hand?
at hand, no, because postmodernism is an entire what you call it, an
Discipline?
entire no. It's an entire cornucopia of disciplines.
Oh,
That's the word I was looking. I knew it was I knew it was a fancy word. I was looking for cornucopia.
okay, well, let me just Google a definition again.
Well, let me give you my take on it. I see it as a reaction to modernism and everything brought about by modernism, things like industrialism, capitalism, what they perceive as the origins of racism.
Okay, hang on a second then. Let me just read this def now. I'm just using philosophybasics.com again, just anyone's wondering. Postmodernism is a broad movement in the late 20th century philosophy and the arts, marked in general terms by an openness to meaning and authority from unexpected places, and a willingness to borrow unashamedly from previous movements or traditions. It's often defined negatively as a reaction or opposition to the equally ill-defined modernism, although some claim that it represents a whole new paradigm in intellectual thought. The term postmodernism originates in architecture to denote a reactionary movement against the perceived blandness and hostility of the modernist movement, and also against the pretensions of high modernism, with its pursuit of an ideal perfection, harmony, and form of function. With its pursuit of an ideal perfection, a harmony of form and function, and dismissal of frivolous ornamentation. It came to be used in arts, music, and literature, for any pluralistic or reactionary style that is often more ornamental than modernism, and which is not afraid to borrow from previous artistic styles, often in a playful or ironic fashion. It tends to lack a clear central hierarchy or organizing principle, although it often embodies extreme complexity, contradiction, ambiguity, diversity, and interconnectedness or interreferentiality, and is typically marked by a revival of traditional elements and techniques. Right, okay, that's interesting actually, because you can see exactly what you're talking about with the relation to positivism there, being the more modernist position, and postmodernism being directly against that in many ways.
Yeah, postmodernism can really be thought of as the reaction to modernism. So, and with critical theory in particular, you now have not so much a reaction to critical theory, but an expansion of it everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
During the modernist era, or during the time when modernists were the only game in town, you had studies of structuralism and studies of colonialism. When the postmodernists come around, they have post-structuralism and post-colonialism and so on. They take these things which were once applied only to capitalism and to apply to all of these other dialectical relationships.
Right. Okay. And so let's talk about the reason postmodernism is bullshit.
Well, that would involve the use of reason, so you would only be preaching to the choir.
Yeah, but I think that it might be worth going over quickly, just in case anyone's wondering.
Well, the first thing to note is that in postmodernism, when we're talking about postmodernism, we're talking about it strictly within the sociological, philosophical context. We're not concerned with the arts or with literature, literary analysis. It doesn't matter. We don't care about that. We're talking only about the way people analyze society. And the first thing to note is something that people on the left, like Noam Chomsky, and people on the right have alike noticed. Karl Popper, I think, was on the right, slightly right of center.
Mm-hmm.
He noticed this as well. And that is that all of this postmodernist sociological literature, it contains very flowery language.
Mm.
They try to pimp up the intellectual status of their ideas by being as obtuse and obfuscatory as possible.
Deliberately ambiguous, I think is
the
problem I have with it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Sokol affair.
Well, I was about to bring that up actually. I was about to, basically, the problem I have with postmodernism is a few things actually, and it's probably the same problem I have with critical theory as well. It's the idea that things that exist aren't do so arbitrarily. You know, it's like as if the world can be broken down into categories, and the fact that you've done this makes these categories of equal value. And so, and this really bothers me, because things are as they are for a reason, and often some things are more valuable and more important and should be treated with more respect than other things. And the critical theorist sort of postmodernist position seems to be to take everything, reduce it to the same value, and say, well, that's why now everything is interchangeable. And I don't think everything is interchangeable.
Yeah, I would say that is a consequence that postmodernism does impose. It was imposed to a lesser extent with modernist social theories, at least the non-positivist ones. But yeah, when it comes to social theories involving postmodernism, that does seem to be an inevitable consequence.
Yeah,
cultural relativism, relativism in many areas.
Yeah.
There's
well, yeah, that's
yeah, because if you look,
I mean, that's opening the door to cultural relativism, and say that, you know, Somalia's culture is equally as valid as sort of Britain's culture, and it's just like, I don't care who you are, but that's wrong.
Yeah, because if you look at their ontology, they are historicists, and some of the more extreme ones are full-blown constructionists. You know, whereas in science you have almost exclusively people who subscribe to realistic ontologies. You know, the world as it is, like you said, for a reason. And this reason doesn't have to do with, or at least doesn't really have. They don't place as much an emphasis on things like social construction and interpretation, if any. This is something that's almost exclusive to constructionists and historicists, which is why I think part of the way to cure this problem in academia is to have everybody move over, first of all, into a realist ontology, and then into some version of, maybe not positivism, maybe some new empiricism. Something that channels David Hume, but takes on board, the criticisms of Kant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to agree that there, you know, like we said with the scientism folks, that anything taken to an unreasonable extent is, you know, obviously negative, and I mean, the thing is not even necessarily an unreasonable extent. All it is the problem is just ignoring other factors and aspects of reality. For example, like the determinism is just like, okay, but human beings are rational creatures. If we were just animals, we didn't think, then sure, you know, you might be right. But the fact that people are able to reason means that we're not, you know, we can't explain the world purely through determinism. And the whole postmodernist SJW approach of, well, you know, human beings are a blank slate, and, you know, there is no biological determination for anything that they do, or, you know, it's all just social constructs. It's the exact same problem, just in an opposite direction. It's just, you know, and I can't believe that we're talking about ideologies that aren't really based in reality, as, you know, they've become as popular as they are. It's insane.
Yeah. You know, I think it really comes down to having a methodology whose limits are clear, whose falsifiability conditions are clear, whose research, you know, it really has to be a fact-based research. It has to be a reality-oriented research. You have to acknowledge that there are things involved in society, like societal patterns, as a result of certain stimuli, certain social stimuli that are not subject to individual interpretation. That, you know, we can say this pattern exists when you do thing A or thing B.
Yeah, and even if there are individual exceptions, that doesn't mean the pattern isn't true.
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking of sort of like, you know, Newton's laws of motion. They're very idealized. They're very general, but they do hold true when you're talking about, you know, something in a vacuum with perfect distribution of mass, blah blah blah. I would like to think that there could be some social laws of motion describing how social forces interact with its components, with groups of people, or with just people in general.
I think there absolutely are. I mean, I think one of the things that I think a lot of critiques of a lot of these things seem to leave out a sort of an almost sort of Machiavellian power analysis, which is what Marxism, the SJWs, approach everything with. Everything is about power, and I think that really having a more sort of and this is the thing, because power is the sort of thing that people don't really consciously think about, but are always aware of. And I think having a conscious analysis of this on top of something else might really help.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. All I know is you do have to move away from where things are right now.
Oh yeah.
There have been negotiations in the past. I brought up Thomas Kuhn. You have the Kuhnians who take, Thomas Kuhn basically introduced science as a social enterprise, where there's a lot of bias and irrationality. But
that's not what science is, or supposed to be anyway.
Yeah, Kuhn does offer. Well, I don't remember if on the structure of scientific revolutions they actually did offer solutions. I don't know if at the time there were things like double-blind studies and awareness of what happens when you don't have controls and the problems that confirmation bias introduced. But we do understand these things now, and we do know how to control and mitigate them. And so you have a group of people called the Kuhnians who basically take Kuhn's, the little that Kuhn said about science as a social enterprise, and they blow it up and they say science is a social construct. It's like, fuck, why? Just fuck off.
Yeah, no, I have encountered SJWs who literally think that. They think that science. I've heard a professor of what fucking university was it? I can't remember now. I'll find it. Where he had literally said reason itself was a white male European construct.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
You explain that using what Weber came out with, that everything that in our society that we perceive as normal, right? It was either Weber or Heidegger. Everything you come out with that you perceive as normal is the result of you being raised in that society. So if something sounds reasonable, like reason, that's because that's the society you were raised in. And as you were raised in a white supremacist, racist, sexist patriarchy, this thing that everybody holds to high regard, reason, is actually, it's racist.
Yeah, but this is ridiculous though, because like science and reason aren't ideologies; they're methodologies, aren't they?
Yeah.
So how
well, you're mansplaining now. Then that's
oh my god, and I'm probably white-splaining as well, and straight-splaining. Oh my god, I'm such a bigot.
Blocked.
Yeah, blocked, double blocked. Now new blockbot. Yeah, but yeah. So basically, it's all nonsense. And this is the going back to the SoCal affair. Then this was the real. I guess. I mean, for me, it just seems to be the absolute nail in the coffin of postmodernism. I don't understand how anyone could contend that postmodernism isn't full of shit, because I'm just using the Wikipedia article for convenience, but the SoCal affair was a hoax, a publishing hoax perpetrated by Alan Sokal,
my physicist.
Sorry?
I just wanted to proudly throw in that he was a physicist.
Yes, a physics professor at New York University and University College London. In 1996, he submitted an article to Social Text, an academic journal of postmodern cultural studies. The submission was an experiment to test the journal's intellectual rigor, and specifically to investigate whether a leading North American journal of cultural studies, whose editorial collectives include such luminaries as Frederick Jameson and Andrew Ross, would publish an article liberally spotted with nonsense if A, it sounded good, and B, flattered the editor's ideological preconceptions. The article itself was called Transgressing the Boundaries Towards a Transformative Hermeneutics of Quantum Gravity. Now, what exactly does that mean?
It doesn't mean shit.
But let's go through each word and let's see why it doesn't mean shit. Because, towards a transformative hermeneutics, what exactly would that? I mean, what's supposed to?
Okay, the hermeneutics used by some social scientists, it would be sort of if you look at Marxist hermeneutics in particular, you would see that
Because just hermeneutics is knowledge that deals with interpretation, right?
Yeah, but here's the thing: there's a broad way of looking at hermeneutics, and there's a more narrow way. And I'm trying to think of what the more narrow way is. But let's go with your way for now, interpretation. So transformative hermeneutic, a new way of interpreting. Go on.
Yeah. So transformative, obviously, I suppose what he means is trying to change the understanding of quantum gravity, right? The interpretation of quantum gravity.
Yeah, or the underlying, or the set of assumptions that forces us to interpret quantum gravity.
Okay.
So
what?
Yeah.
And now I'm no expert on quantum gravity. So you being a physicist, would you like to explain that to me?
Well, technically, nobody is an expert on quantum gravity since we haven't found it yet.
All right. So you're a postmodernist too, right? Sorry, I'm just checking. Go on.
But the idea is you have four fundamental forces in the universe. There's the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic force, and gravity.
Mm-hmm.
And our goal is to combine them all into one big, beautiful force called the theory of everything. So far, we've been pretty successful with the other three, the non-gravity ones. We call it the grand unified theory. And we know how these things work both at the classical and quantum level. Well, in the case of the nuclear forces, they're only at the quantum level since they don't exist classically. But we know how electromagnetism works at the classical level. And so by combining electromagnetism with those two, by extension, we do have a complete account of those two other forces. But when it comes to gravity, we know how it works at the classical and relativistic levels. We have no idea how it works at the quantum level. Einstein's equations and the equations of quantum mechanics, they don't talk to each other. And it's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you try to combine gravity with the other forces as well in order to have this sort of runaround way to get to quantum gravity. It doesn't work either.
Right.
The closest we've ever come is with string theory, but we're nowhere near able to test that because that requires a particle accelerator like zillions of miles long.
Yeah. And so is this something that can be interpreted, or is it something that is deduced?
It's deduced mathematically from existing physics theories. And you sprinkle some other things on there. You have to develop some new branches of math, modify some old ones, which is perfectly fine. We've done this before. Einstein had to learn non-Euclidean and differential geometry before he came out with general relativity, so that's okay. As long as your math, the language you use to describe these things is internally consistent, you're good to go.
Right. But what I mean is there aren't like political interpretations of this, or
no.
I didn't think there would be, because that's the point of science. But yeah, so basically the premise of the article is nonsense.
Yeah, I actually read this article before, and it's hilarious because he deliberately makes these glaring errors. For example, he says the reason we haven't been able to find a linear theory of quantum mechanics, which is needed for quantum gravity, is because we have all these sexist patriarchal assumptions underlying our theory.
Does he really say that?
Something along those lines. But in reality, he knows the guy is smart. He knows
this is a hoax.
He knows just as well as any undergraduate knows that quantum mechanics is not only already a linear theory, it is the only linear theory we have in physics, which is hilarious that he throws that in there, and he throws in a lot of other hilarious shit.
Oh wow, he actually does, doesn't he? I mean, he literally says in the conclusion, as feminist thinkers have repeatedly pointed out, the present culture, this contamination is overwhelmingly capitalist, patriarchal, and militaristic.
Yeah. And these are the reasons for the failure of our ability to develop quantum gravity thus far. It's because we're using these sexist assumptions.
Mathematics is portrayed as a woman whose nature desires to be conquered. Jesus.
This was published in a postmodernist journal. They accepted it.
Oh yeah, no, that's what I was going to get to, because basically it's obviously nonsense. But the thing is, it seems very much like Poe's law in action, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell whether it's a fake or not, because what they're talking about is horseshit. And it was published in the Social Text in spring summer '96. What is it? Yeah, quantum gravity is a social and linguistic construct. At that time, the journal did not practice peer review. What a surprise! On the day of its publication in May, SoCal revealed in lingua franca that the article was a hoax, identifying it as a pastiche of left-wing Kant-fawning references, grandiose quotations and outright nonsense, structured around the silliest quotations by postmodernist academics that you could find about mathematics and physics. And yet they didn't obviously read it very well. And so this is basically like, I mean, this just undermines postmodernism entirely, doesn't it? I mean,
I think one of the reviewers actually said, well, you know, I derived something from it. I learned something from it. The way I interpreted it gave me greater insight.
Well, hey, buddy, we all learned a lot from this, you know.
Yeah, and this instigated the first science wars. I am pushing right now, agitating for a second set of science wars, so we can put this bullshit to bed once and for all. I mean, the way they talk about the way they talk about neuroscience and developmental biology and evolutionary psychology, the way they derive these things as evil and racist, and you're all the next Joseph Mengelists. It pisses you off because, you know, we're in our labs, we're trying to do our work, and these fuckers come knocking on our door. You fucking sexist, capitalist, racist pigs! What are you doing? Fuck off! We're trying to do our work. What the fuck are you doing?
Yeah,
they don't actually do that yet, but
I think it's probably coming. That's the thing. If once they've conquered the sort of social sciences and all that realm, they're going to come for you guys. I mean, you can see academic papers already trying to inject feminism and intersectionality into STEM subjects, and it's just like, I mean, obviously they haven't got very far yet, but that's only because most people agree reality is important. When most people don't agree that reality is important, that's when they're coming in. And this is what I try. There are physicists and whatnot who watch my channel, and they're like, "Well, this isn't going to happen in STEM because of, you know, standards." And I'm just like, "Yeah, but that's because you agree standards are a good thing, and you all agree standards are a good thing. When you don't agree this, then it will, you know."
I'll tell you this: they can try. They can try to pervert physics. They can try to pervert STEM, but you know what? The creationists tried it. So
yeah,
if the feminists want it, if these new third wave feminists, if Black Lives Matter, if they want to know how that works out, they can talk to the creationists, and you know, they can give it a shot. They can give it their best shot. That's all.
They are, and like I said, at the moment they're not getting anywhere because people are based in reality. But again, this is my problem with ideologies, man. You know, you could find that more and more physicists are also SJWs, and you know, eventually they might start getting their postmodernist bullshit in physics, and then that'll actually start causing real problems for people because, you know, people's lives are based on these things being true.
Yeah, I don't think a postmodernist physics could ever work because physics is so they're not going to have an impact in the field at all.
Well, I hope that's true. I really do hope that's true. I'm sure it is. I'm sure that I'm sure I'm just, you know, looking at the worst case scenario. But what I'm saying is it's not impossible for people to believe bullshit, even if it's demonstrably bullshit. And I think we should really not fool ourselves into thinking that, STEM is safe. You know, it's got science. Well, they're coming for science. Science is a social construct. You know, they're coming for you.
Yeah. The way I see it, we are pushing back. There is a slow pushback, but it is going to rise, I think, and I think it's going to rise soon with our philosophical allies and with our allies in the social sciences who want to be decolonized of these people.
Yeah. It's it's amazing how much they talk about colonialism while they are busy colonizing people with their bullshit. But right, okay, so
but the biggest threat that I see, though, is the kind of shit that was done to Tim Hunt and what happened. What pissed me off even more with Shirt Storm.
Yeah, what was the name of the chap? I can't even remember his name now.
It was Matt.
Is it Matt Taylor?
Yes, Matt Taylor.
Yeah, Matt Taylor. Yeah, I should have remembered that a lot easier because I've covered both of these things extensively. So sorry, Matt.
Yeah, you know. The Matt Taylor one, that really hit pretty close to me. It hit close to a lot of physicists, especially astrophysicists.
Oh, and I think that it was great to see the general public reacting to that as well, because the general public they genuinely have a great opinion of scientists. You know, because most scientists are actually really nice people, and most scientists are actually doing something productive. And so when they, you know, manage to land a spacecraft on a comet, everyone's like, yeah, that's great. And so, I mean, don't get me wrong, in a lot of ways, we should probably we should probably be thankful to them for making a big deal out of his fucking shirt and calling him a sexist. Because, I mean, I think a lot of people really became aware of the danger of these idiots.
Yeah, me in particular, this was a huge turning point for me.
Any particular reason? Just because it was physics? Or?
You know, they made it personal.
Hey man, I'm on board with them, man. They do make it personal. That's one of the fundamental things of the whole philosophy. I was listening to Sam Harris's the best podcast ever or something like that, where he was talking to the lawyer SJW, and at one point I've been meaning to go through it and talk about some specific points that have been bothering me about his just worldview, and one of the things that I've heard said so many times, and he said it, he just came out with it without even thinking about it. He was like, everything is political. And it's just like, right, okay, good God, if everything is political, no wonder you're acting like a bunch of spoiled babies. You know, if you think everything about your personality and everything you think is a political act, then no wonder you're getting up in everyone's face, hey, this is now a political thing. You're on the other side of this. Dude, I don't give a fuck about your fucking childish SJW bullshit. It's not political. Go away. You know? But yeah, I'll do a video on that or something.
But anyway, after the rise of the postmodernists, starting in 1968, you have all these radical movements come along. The 70s, like I said, were a shitty time. You had stagflation, really, really fucked up economic situation.
Yeah, especially.
And you have a relative.
Sorry, yeah, go.
Yeah, and you have a President Carter who is widely hated, not entirely unjustified, but at the same time not completely justified. He had a pretty weak presidency. Anyway, you had this reactionary pushback. You had the birth of the neoconservatives as a result of all these factors, and Ronald Reagan won that election by a landslide.
Yeah, it was the same in Britain with Margaret Thatcher after the labour strikes in the 70s. I mean, my dad tells me horror stories of the effect of the 3-day working week and rubbish piling up in the streets and riots and all this sort of stuff. I mean, Jesus Christ, no wonder people voted for sort of strong leadership.
Yeah, and whatchamacallit? It's funny. A lot of the parallels that we see today.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels we see today. Ronald Reagan, this showman, who wins everybody over with his strong, no nonsense personality. This guy and
yet Ronald Reagan's lionized by the right, isn't he? And by the traditional conservatives, anyway.
He is, but you get this.
At the time he was just an actor, wasn't he? So people were very
he was a governor of California.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, but he was before that. He was just a guy from show business.
Yeah.
But the thing about what's happening right now, the economy went to shit in 2007, 2008, and we've had a president these past 8 years who's widely hated by a lot of people, not completely justified. Not entirely unjustified. I personally have fewer complaints against Obama than I don't. Personally, I think he was a decent president, but for the most part. I
don't know. I think there were some very significant failures of leadership under his watch, to be honest. But
I can't deny that.
He could have prevented a lot of this crap going on at the start. He could have nipped a lot of this in the bud. I mean, I understand the political pressure of, we can't put boots on the ground in Iraq, but I mean, he should have just been really unpopular and prevented ISIS. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is what it is. We can't go back now. But I can understand why people would be.
Yeah, I think there are some very legitimate criticisms of Obama. He's not saying that,
Yeah, well, let's look at the circumstances of Obama's election, Carter's election.
Well, let's not go into it now. We can talk about another time though, because I think it is an interesting.
Oh, but this is relevant.
Oh, okay.
This is super important.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I thought we were going off on a
tangent. This comes down to what the consequences ultimately are of these radical movements. Carter, he comes into the scene and he's a nobody. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody really cares. He runs on the motto, "I will never lie to you." Why does he run on that motto? Well, Watergate is still fresh on everybody's mind.
Nixon.
And Ford, he pardoned Nixon. So everybody was really pissed off at this nepotistic, this self-serving type of government behavior.
Yeah.
Obama, this is a similar situation. After George W. Bush, we'll take anybody who's not on the right.
Oh my God, Obama's campaign was messianic. My God, I was actually genuinely worried about it because, I mean, honestly, in a lot of ways, I'm genuinely pleased that Obama turned out to be a corporate sellout. Because if he wasn't, I mean, this guy could have done a hell of a lot with the political capital he had.
Yeah, I remember. What was it? It was Yes We Can. He views everybody with hope. He ends up winning. His presidency, whatever its shortcomings, I think was still stronger than Carter's. I think that's why he was reelected.
Right. Okay. I can't
so
about Carter's to be able to make an analysis of it. To be honest.
Yeah. Well, there's also the fact that the neo-Marxist movement was really, all of these movements based in neo-Marxism and in postmodernism, they were really getting radical within Carter's first term. They didn't become very radical until Obama's second term, or at least they weren't as loud.
Yeah.
But as with Carter, they have inspired a neo-reactionary pushback. And as with Carter, these particular reactionaries have brought up another showman, another guy from show business, and this time it's a Donald, not a Ronald. But yeah, I think these are important parallels to take into consideration. I think these are hard lessons that the left has had to learn, and hopefully will not have. Hopefully we're not going to have to learn it again.
Well, honestly, I think at some point we are, but I think it's effectively a cycle that we're going to have to just get used to. We're probably always going to have to fight these people every couple of generations.
I hope not, because if we can put an end to this, because I went through this history for a reason.
Yeah.
What? I went through this. Yeah, I went through this philosophical history for a reason, because I want to go back. I want to see where everything went wrong, and I want to stop the cycle from repeating itself. I want to go back and sort of kill off every bad philosophy and sociology that followed at some point along the way. I haven't even gotten to the end. All of these different flavors of postmodernism, they all were going their separate directions, doing their own thing. It wasn't until 1989 when Kimberly Crenshaw of the fourth generation of critical theory combined all of these different strands of neo-Marxism, racial, gender, and economic, into this grand unified theory of identity politics and conflict.
Which is intersectionality.
Yes. Yes, intersectionality is what happened. It's basically all of the 1970s in one giant dump.
Which, I mean, it's the logical end conclusion. It's obviously where all of this is going. And then, the Kyriarchy is born.
Yeah.
So 1989, what was the name of the lady, sorry?
Kimberly Crenshaw.
Kimberly Crenshaw. Okay, I'll find something by her to read as well.
Read the initial one, and Gary Edwards has made some videos on intersectionality as well. I would recommend that.
Okay, I certainly will. Right, okay, yeah. So she creates the grand unified theory of bullshit. Identity politics. And where does it go from there?
Well, it goes to where we are now. You combine pieces of all the philosophies that we've gone through, and you see how Kant's transcendental idealism morphed into something that is based rather, these lenses that are preventing us from seeing the world correctly. They're not just physical now; they're cultural. It's the culture we're raised in that prevents us from seeing the truth. It's what blinds the oppressor to the plight of the oppressed. The oppressed is not blinded because they have double vision as a result of standpoint theory.
Yeah.
But the oppressor is blinded, and we have to understand the situation of the oppressed in order to fix their situation. Well, how do we fix their situation? We do so with interpretive methods. We do so taking on board these notions of reflexivity and hermeneutics and all of this. Instead of actually, doing real research, we sit down with them and we listen to their opinions of the reasons behind their oppression, and we go with it. You talk to your average Black Lives Matter advocate. Yeah, the big threat to Black lives is racist police officers. But you look at the data, you see that the
black men. Yeah.
Well, even bigger than that there is a form of racial injustice in America that's largely being ignored by Black Lives Matter. and that's in the medical industry. And you can see the cumulative effects of distributive injustice.
Okay, go on. I'm interested.
In medicine, I don't have the papers right now.
No, that's okay. Just give me an overview.
What the overview is: Black people have less access to healthcare as a result of this, as a result of certain circumstances that do have to do with their skin color and are rooted both in the history of Black people in this country and in certain policies. And you can see that they die disproportionately from things like blood poisoning as a result of type 2 diabetes. And you can see that there's a direct correlation between their lack of access to healthcare in this regard and the amount of them that are dying of these largely preventable causes. And they're dying in much larger numbers than they are dying from the bullet of a cop's gun. And this is being ignored because it doesn't have the same cathartic effect as watching a live leak video of a cop shooting a black kid does.
Yeah, of course. So it's not really gratifying, like you were saying earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going through this data is a thankless task. That
sure.
And it's not really good for mobilizing movements to have this crazy Pan-African ideology driven. But
see, this is why I'm in favor of universal healthcare. I don't think that wealth should be a barrier to healthcare if logically we can achieve it, and we can. I mean, so
I agree.
Yeah, I understand that this is not a commonly held position in America, but I'm sorry, guys. I think that it's you that rather than everyone else on this one. It's the kind of society you want to live in, and I would rather live in a society that doesn't have wealth as a barrier to health, basically, or as minimal as possible. But I mean, I'm not saying there can't be private health institutions or anything. Of course, there should be, absolutely. But I think the basic sort of healthcare that, like you say, easily preventable. But again, this is just my political opinion because I'm a humanist. But yeah, okay. So we're up to the present day. Then we know we've seen the points that I think reasonably conclude why we've arrived here, and I think I mean, there's nothing in it that I found disagreeable. I mean, like I said, I'm no expert or anything, but I think I've kept up okay, and I don't think I've seen anything that I particularly disagree with. I'm looking forward to reading the comments on this because I suspect that we'll have some very informed people telling us some things that, and I suspect they'll probably be adding to what you're saying rather than taking away from it.
And correcting any minor mistakes I may have made.
Yeah.
I don't think I made any huge major mistakes, but I may have misattributed one discovery or got it in a date wrong or something. But I think the substance of what I'm saying is correct.
Yeah, to my understanding, it seems to be. So, but like I said, I'm no expert. So, but
and I just want to leave on a positive, or rather positivist note.
Go on.
I did mention positivism for a reason, not only as sort of a comparison to the interpretative methods that have taken over, but as an alternative that we should pursue. If we could somehow go back in time to before the Neo-Kantians took on this Hegelian reading and perverted Kant in the way they did, before you cut them off, and you cut off a huge section of philosophy. You go along with David Hume instead, and you take Hume's route from Hume to Comte, from Comte to Durkheim, and then from Durkheim, not to the logical positivists, but to a different form of positivism, playing post-positivists. Those are Kuhnians, and we talked about how they're assholes. We need something different. You need something that doesn't have this sort of deliberate political orientation in it that the Neo-Kantians did. They liked socialism, and they oriented their social research to move in the direction of socialism. And then that's how it's been all these years.
No, I agree with you. I would like to see a philosophy that was independent of context. So it didn't require this historicity and this sort of application to history and context, because I want principles that are true regardless of who's saying them or where you are.
Yeah, like I said, you look at society. You have effects A, B, and C of these things, A, B, and C acting on society in certain ways, and you record how society responds in a manner X, Y, and Z that corresponds to the way it was acted upon. And from this, or from the patterns that develop, you create predictive models. They have to be falsifiable, blah, blah, blah. Put in all the bias controls in there, put the double blinds. Yeah. Just make the field fundamentally based on the observations, and make sure that the observations are cleansed of bias through these methods we know can minimize bias and its effects.
Yeah, we can accept that it's always going to be a factor, but like you say, we can attempt to minimize it. So, you know, I mean, what else could you do? And that's just a common sense thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you do this, you probably aren't going to end up with Marxism.
Of course not.
You may end up with a collectivized economy, but it won't be done on Marxist terms. It's not clear. You may end up with a hybrid. You may end up with a free market. Who knows? I personally lean toward the left, though, so I do hope for, if not something collectivized on a terms that are not Marxist, at least for some hybrid that does lean left. And I personally think that's how it's going to turn out. But if it doesn't turn out that way, that's fine. My ideology follows the facts, not the other way around.
Yeah,
I
think for anyone who wants to base their thought process in reality, I mean, like you said, positivism really has to kind of be the bedrock of anything you do. You know, I mean, you can't expect to just live in a world that isn't based on empiricism. Like I run a Facebook group called The Rationalists, and I've chosen it as a cute name, you know, and it kind of implies in the average layperson's mind someone who concerns about reason. You know, the rationalists, you know, it's just basically the tagline is like activists for reason. And occasionally I'll get some smart aleck going on, oh, what about empiricism? Don't you know? And I'm like, yes, I know, it's just a cute name. I'm just assuming we are all empiricists. And, you know, I mean, this is not an argument we need to have again, you know. But yeah, so but empiricist just doesn't have the sort of ring to it, you know.
I was thinking maybe Tolstoyan, but I don't know. It's tricky.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I'm not suggesting this should be like the name of a movement or anything. You know, I was just using it as a cute name. But right, okay, so yeah, I think we've covered everything that we needed to cover.
I believe so.
So yeah, I'll end the stream there then. Thank you very much for coming on and talking us through this. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to seeing the comments. And
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've got a few new things on my reading list now, and I think I'll try and get Gary Edwards to have a listen if he's got some time, and so he can, you know, tell us if we've messed anything up or forgot anything, basically. But yeah, like I said, thank you very much for coming on. I'm sure we'll talk again. And thanks for everyone for watching. Take care.